Sports capture the attention of hundreds of millions of people all over the world every single day. Whether it's watching humans push their body to the limit, seeing a miracle on ice unfold, witnessing a century-long drought come to an end, or watching barriers be broken, sports excite the world. Sports, as well as some of the greatest athletes to compete at the professional level, inspire countless individuals to hopefully be just like them one day. However, being an athlete is an incredibly demanding job, with countless hours of training, exercise, and proper nutrition just to even get to the professional level. And once the professional level is finally reached, that training kicks into high gear just to stay on top. The world of professional sports is a business, and it will chew you up and spit you out if you are not the best of the best. This business mentality and the high level of competition to reach the professional level of sports is a massive barrier for all athletes, and is a major reason why so many hopeful athletes will never go pro. Professional sports also require constantly being in the public eye, being scrutinized on an international stage, which can take a toll on someone's mental health, a recent example being pro tennis player Naomi Osaka. In 2021, Osaka withdrew from the French Open after being fined $15,000 for saying that she would not attend press conferences during the event, stating that the conferences could be damaging to her mental health. Osaka details her situation as well as the situation of many other athletes in her Time magazine article, "It's Okay to Not Be Okay." Osaka was not the first athlete to open up about her mental health struggles, but her vulnerability has showed many athletes, professional or not, that they are not alone. The commitment of pro athletes such as Osaka and many others, including Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, and Simone Biles, are all in an attempt to educate younger athletes about the importance of mental health. These younger athletes, especially those in collegiate sports, experience the demand and time commitment required from sports, but a vast majority of them are doing it for the love of the game, knowing that they will never become a pro athlete. Collegiate athletes must sacrifice precious time from either doing their schoolwork or socializing with friends in order to train and prepare for their sport, which can take an unseen mental toll. Not only that, but psychiatrists Lynette Hughes and Gerard Levy claim that other stressors such as injury and competitive failure can lead to depression and other risk-taking behaviors. Research from sports medicine specialist Margot Patukian states that injury especially is one of the biggest stressors, and the response of a student athlete to injury can reveal mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and more. In March of 2022, former Ohio State football player Harry Miller made an emotional Instagram post saying he was medically retiring from the sport after struggling with his mental health, saying he would have rather been dead, reduced to a sticker on the back of his teammates' helmets, than be seen as a coward for seeking out help. Also in March, Stanford star goalkeeper Katie Meyer tragically died by suicide, which has led Meyer's family to call for a national conversation about mental health. With so many potential stressors to student athletes, I decided to look deeper at my very own Shippensburg University to investigate how these stressors can affect the mental health of a student athlete. First, I wanted to get to know some of the athletic faculty at the university and learn more about the mental health conversations they have with their athletes.
Those conversations happen on a consistent basis, not necessarily the same athlete, but athletes know that when I say I have an open door policy, it's truly an open door policy. It's I'll stop what I'm doing to make sure an athlete knows that they're taken care of, and that comes from being a parent. Like I have two little boys, and at the end of the day, their moms and dads aren't here with them, and so I want to make sure that their moms and dads know that their kids are going to be taken care of, that people care about them as people, and they're not just a number, they're not just an athlete, that they're taken care of on all levels, and first and foremost, just being a person, making sure that they're mentally okay and they feel okay and they feel comfortable with what they're doing. So yeah, those conversations happen all the time for various different reasons.
Well, I would say that there's two different things. So sometimes an athlete will come in and they're initially talking about, I don't feel like I'm playing well, and I'm not playing as well as I could, and I'm not sure what's getting in the way. And that's sort of a gateway to a possible mental health issue. Certainly not always by any means, but oftentimes they'll come in, they want to try out talking about this thing that is not as serious to then decide, okay, am I going to talk about this more serious thing? Or you'll have other student athletes who come in who just say, hey, I feel just really anxious, or I feel really depressed. Those are the two big ones. And I'm not sure what's going on. And not only is it affecting my play, but it's affecting my academics. It's affecting my interactions with my teammates and my friends. So the two biggest ones when we get to the mental health issues, not only for athletes, but for non-athletes, is depression and anxiety.
In terms of mental health conversations, I try to have them like somewhat frequently. I think it's a balance between talking about it too much and not talking about it enough. I think you have to be aware of your student athletes and that they are going to face mental health challenges, and it's going to be different in terms of perception for each student athlete. Whereas one student athlete might be able to get through something a little more easily, another student athlete might have the same situation and hang on to it longer. So we are often talking about mental health and that it's okay to not be okay.
On a bigger scale, when it's team meetings, more or less just very brief, reiterating to them, the resources that they have available, that if they need help, they need, my door is always open, please reach out. On an individual level, much more extensively, over the years, we've had a number of individual players who have had some mental health issues and mental health obstacles, honestly, in their way. And those conversations have been more specific to the individual player, trying to encourage them to seek out, the needed help that they require.
These discussions are integral to validating an athlete's feelings if they believe that they are struggling, and a major part of those mental health discussions with student athletes is the recognition of the stigma that is present, that athletes will be perceived as weak for revealing that they are having a hard time mentally.
People think that athletes are athletes first and people second, in my opinion. If you look at the professional level or high Division I level, there are a lot of student athletes that are coming out with their struggles with mental health, and some of it comes from the social media and people in the comments section on your famous sports pages, making comments about their athletic performance, but they forget that they're actually human beings first. So the stigma is they don't want to ask for help because they don't want to seem weak, and asking for help may appear weak. However, we're trying to shift that in that it's not a weakness, it's actually to make your experience in your sport better by getting things taken care of.
You have to learn to be vulnerable, which is a really hard thing just for people in general to talk about how they're feeling that might be perceived as weak, so to speak, and weak and athletics do not go together very well. So getting past that hurdle.
Well, I think it affects a couple of ways. One, you might be worried that a teammate or a coach, actually that's often the case, they're worried that a coach might see them as weak, and therefore that might affect their ability to get playing time. That might affect whether they continue to have their scholarship from year to year. Not that a coach would take away a scholarship because of a mental health issue, but just if the coach felt like there was this overall viewpoint that the athlete can't handle things, then they get less opportunity. Then there's also just what we call self-talk messages that student athletes give themselves. That I see myself as weak if I can't figure this out by myself. Or I see myself as I can't handle things if I can't figure this out myself. And that is often even worse, much worse than what anybody else might say or think, is what they're telling themselves.
When discussing stressors for student athletes with some of the faculty at CHIP, physical injuries have some of the biggest effects on the mental health of athletes, as missing time from playing due to injury can lead to a negative affect among athletes.
I've seen a lot of times where, as simple as coming back from an injury, you're a little bit more timid because you don't want to get hurt. But also, so many of our athletes, part of the way that they define themselves is being an athlete and being able to perform, right? That's part of what defines themselves. It shouldn't be the only definition, but it's a part of who they are. So when they remove a part of who they are and who they've been for so long, because to play at the collegiate level, most people have had to have played this sport for X amount of years. It's not something you just pick up and go and do. You have to have a competency at the sport. You have to have a skill set.
We have one of our players who was in the weight room, and busted up her shin doing a box jump. It kind of made her feel like she was missing out on the opportunity to compete for a position on the field. And that weighs on our student athletes because you have zero control over the injury happening or your recovery time, any of that.
When you remove something that's taken so long for them to develop and nurture and hone in on, and then thoughts of doubt start creeping into your head about like, well, am I ever going to get back to where I was as an athlete? Am I going to be a starter again? Just all those little stressors add up, and eventually it comes down to the point where you're negatively affected from it, from just being from a simple injury, because of all the other stresses that have happened between removing yourself from practice, removing yourself from games, removing yourself from weight room, removing yourself from that part of your identity away from you. It just it can overload and overwhelm you sometimes.
Say you have a 6-month recovery. In your mind, you're thinking about all of the work you put in prior to that injury, and now you're going to lose it because you can't train, you can't run, you're limited in your, ability to practice your specific sport. So I think it's that length of time and the unknown of what I'm going to be like when I get back and when I get cleared, and will I still be able to perform the way I did prior to injury.
Yeah, especially if somebody is experiencing it for the first time, it's easy to get depressed. What they then struggle with is, especially if it's a long-term injury, then they struggle with the whole idea of realizing that, hey, I have an athlete identity, meaning I see myself as an athlete, I value myself as an athlete, that's how I feel good about myself, is what I accomplished as an athlete. And now for weeks or months, how am I going to figure out if I'm doing well if I'm not playing my sport? How am I going to figure out if I'm a good person if I'm not playing my sport? How am I going to figure out if I'm a valuable person if I'm not playing my sport? And that can be really, really hard because, hey, for, 10, 12 years, this is how they have sort of decided, am I valuable or not, is how well I play in my sport.
Student athletes often have their schedules stretched thin during the semester between practicing 6 days a week, attending a full class load, going to strength and conditioning workouts, and trying to fit some time in to have to themselves. With so many responsibilities, I wanted to talk to some of SHIP's student athletes to see how they balance their busy lives.
I think I balance it pretty well. I am in the criminal justice program, so compared to some of the more math-heavy majors, I don't have as much work to do. Mine's more like paper-based. So I find it, I think, more easy to handle than some other majors. I think personal life and social life kind of get in the way and kind of like muddy up athletics in school because, we're people too. We have our own lives outside of just school and just athletics. So balancing simply just those 4 things, like, it could be a lot.
I would say pretty well. I could be a little bit better in balancing schoolwork, like the student part of the athlete, because of course, like, the athlete part comes easy because it's like fun and that, and then just being like a social person, like, that's nice. But then having to really like buckle down on school is like probably the hardest part. Just like to really regain my focus, even if I'm tired from practice or games and whatnot. Just when I know classes start to pick up a little bit more, and like each class you're having like multiple tests a week or like papers or just presentations and stuff. Just thinking of practice and then having to go do that, it's just like a lot of like stress in a way.
It's a little hard to balance with school. We have 2 invites in the fall, and our second invite falls on the weekends right before finals. So it's really hard to fit in studying and swimming and all that good stuff.
I think that I manage it pretty well. I usually just have a set time and I have set goals for everything that I do. So like I usually have a schedule that I follow from the morning I wake up until like the second I go to bed. And it usually follows the same regimen. So I would say I manage it pretty well. I try to not let it get out of balance, because if it does get out of balance, then it'll feel like, it's just all coming down on me. So I like to just try and make sure I have everything figured out for the next day and the day after that.
This overwhelming nature of collegiate sports is just one stressor that leaves student athletes so vulnerable. As SHIP's athletic faculty emphasized before, physical injuries are another stressor that have the capability of really harming student athletes mentally as well as physically. So, I wanted to see what SHIP's athletes had to say about that sentiment.
And then this most recent year, actually, my senior year, because like day 3 of camp, I tore my meniscus in my knee, so I had to get surgery like week 2.
Minor injuries, nothing like crazy, like ankle sprains, and I recently got diagnosed with tendonitis in my wrist, which is kind of like frustrating because after a while of repeat use, it starts to like hurt. So then it's like I'm not really 100% all the time. I play through ankle injuries all the time, just like get it taped tighter and then just keep going and then ice it after games.
I've had shin splints. I currently have shin splints, actually. It's pretty common over, long distance runners. And I've also had a lot of, knee injuries. Basically the entirety of my career, I've had some sort of knee injuries.
Yeah, I've had tendonitis in my shoulders. I have bad knees. Just this past season, I had to get stitches in my foot. And my back was a big problem this year too. Getting the stitches in my foot, I was out for a couple weeks, so it's more of a mental setback, and obviously physical, not being able to get into practice, but it's more of like seeing all my roommates and my teammates like in practice, seeing them at dinner, talking about how hard practice was, and just like kind of like the feeling of missing out, like I'm not progressing where I should be. Unfortunately, I got hurt a couple weeks before our conference meet. Once we got there, I felt like I just wasn't up to the task. My times were close to my best, but I feel like if I was still in the pool, like if I didn't get hurt, I would have done much better.
Towards the end of the season, I'll usually end up, my body is really beat down, I really can't take much more, and then that's when the injuries will start to roll in. But then after the season is over, I'll usually just take off 2 weeks and I'll do some sort of myself kind of rehab, and I'll be able to figure it out.
It was a struggle, man, especially it being my senior year, and because of COVID and everything, I decided to come back for a master's. I was originally gonna graduate the fall of 2020, play my last season then, and then go on to something else, and COVID hit, so I was like, well, I don't want to leave Shippensburg without finishing, so I did a master's for all that, and then for day 3 of camp to do that as a senior, O-lineman, trying to be a leader on the team, and you just get hurt like that, it sucks, man. It's hard. So, but a lot of people put their sport as part of their identity, and that was definitely for me. When I got hurt, I was like, what am I now? I can't play football, and I guess I'll just be a student now. It's you kind of sit back and you're like, what else do I have besides my sport? So that was definitely overwhelming at that. When it happened, it just destroyed me mentally. But I was just trying not to let anyone see it, or at least trying to play it off I'll be alright, it's cool. I almost when they would ask me about I would change the subject and be nah, well let's focus on this play you did. I would change the subject.
Overwhelming schedules and physical injuries on top of the stigma set for student athletes and their mental health may make athletes feel like they have nowhere to go. However, the Raiders won't let the stigma stop them from reaching out.
So I feel like the stigma that, you're not supposed to go out and talk to anyone is ridiculous. I mean, the idea that you are somehow weak for that, I completely disagree with. I actually think you're stronger if you end up going out and you're talking to someone, because in that way, at least you have someone to talk to. And when you are talking to them, I can speak from experience that at least it feels like a giant weight is lifted off of your shoulder, and it allows you to become better and start building up back to where you were. But if you don't go out and you don't talk to anyone, you just keep it in for yourself, I feel like that's it. You're not going to be able to get better, and the only thing that's going to happen is just going to keep building up. And I feel like that's almost the worst thing that an athlete or just a normal everyday student could do to themselves.
We should be able to feel comfortable to reach out to someone. We should be able to have the resources to reach out. I definitely feel like that the resources are there. They're definitely there. I feel like they could be pushed a little bit more, if that makes sense. But yeah, I feel like we have the resources to reach out.
A lot of times when you're dealing with that stuff, you don't want to go to your head coach. You know, you don't want to, like, you're afraid to go to your head coach, not because you think they won't support you, but you don't want them to see you as like weak, you know, especially in such a hyper masculine sport as football. The stigma, I think, is definitely real. Unfortunately, still, it definitely is getting better. There's definitely way more awareness, even like now versus when I was a younger guy. There's, in, you know, a span of like 4 years, there's way more awareness of it. People are more aware. There's more encouragement to speak out, you know, and I think that's a great thing, because like as male student athletes, a lot of it is like, you, especially with football, like it's a tough sport, and if like you're taught from a young age like you can't show weakness, it's trending in the right direction. It's still not where it needs to be, but it's definitely going in the right direction.
Some people want to stay behind it and like kind of be the tough guy and like muscle up, I guess, and just like if you can't get through like what's in your head, how could you ever perform at the top of your game? But then again, there's other people, like I said, like my roommate, who's very open about it. If you ask if he's okay, he'll tell you everything. He's very open, he goes to therapy, and I think looking at him, I think a lot more people should like go the way he's going and get that help if they really need it.
I hate that stigma, because it's like we're humans too. Like, just because you have to be like tough in your sport and like mentally tough, like to just keep playing, doesn't matter what's going on, like everyone's going through something, but a lot of people are just like scared to do it. I mean, scared to like talk about it per se. I just don't like that stigmatism, because it's like you don't feel like you can talk to anyone, or you feel like you have to just be like, oh, like this isn't that bad, like people are probably going through worse, but like everyone has their own like issue, and it should be talked about.
Student athletes who are struggling with all of the stressors that come with playing a sport may feel like they are all alone, but with the recent rise in pro and college athletes sharing their stories on social media, I wanted to ask these athletes how they felt about it.
I feel like a lot of athletes, if they are struggling mentally, they usually will just keep it to themselves. And, you know, like you said, that's because they don't want to be seen as weak, but I feel like that is just completely wrong. I've lost a couple friends to battling depression in high school, and it eats me inside just knowing if they went out and talked to someone, if they talked to me, if they talked to a parent, it just could have been a completely different outcome. And I feel like people will just let it just build up, and nothing will ever come out of that. Except for, you know, by yourself, you just are breaking down, but on the outside, you just look like completely normal. You know, it's a pretty scary thing if you think about it, because, you know, you can appear to be completely fine, but on the inside, it's just eating away at your mental health.
Yeah, it definitely does, because it's like, oh, like I'm not alone. Like this person's stressed out about school or what's gonna happen next in their life, and like if they're gonna play at like a higher level or whatnot, and like they express those concerns, so it makes everyone kind of feel like, oh, it's not just me.
We look up to these athletes. Might not even be in your own sport. Like I personally look up to hockey players, but you know, if they're struggling, then there's no reason to hide that we're struggling. If they're pro athletes, they're getting paid to do what they love, and we're going to school to do what we love. There's no reason why we shouldn't seek out the help if, you know, even someone at the top of their game is struggling.
It definitely reassures me that the help is there. Sometimes, you know, I'm not having the same struggles as them, so it could be like hard to relate, but it definitely it's definitely one of those reassuring factors that counseling is there and help is there if we need it.
I think it's a great thing. I think it just drives home that point that, hey, like mental illness is real, and mental health struggles are real, and people that you look at that you may think are on the top of the world, like for instance, I forget the Ohio State's lineman that just recently came out, but he stepped away from football completely when he could have easily gone to the NFL, you know? So I think it's a great thing, because someone who may not know that, they look at him like starting offensive lineman at Ohio State, great football player, gonna go to the NFL. He's got everything anyone could want, you know? And you're still struggling. Like, it doesn't matter your circumstance, it can affect you in any way. That's how I look at it. So I think it's a great thing when people come out and are open about it, because honesty is going to be the best way to, I think, help get it moving or continue moving in that direction.
I went into these interviews looking for answers about the mental health resources available to student athletes, why student athletes are so vulnerable to mental health related problems, and how a major stressor like injury can affect a student athlete's mental health. I learned about Shippensburg University's commitment to providing essential resources to student athletes, the overwhelming nature of collegiate sports, and the serious toll that severe injuries can take. I also learned about how willing and ready the student athletes of Shippensburg were to talk to me about an issue that only deserves more attention as time goes on. I would like to thank all participants for helping me learn about such an important topic, and tell everyone who may be struggling that it is okay to not be okay, and that help is just one conversation away.